I have this interesting theory. He's got like different stages of who he's been over the last 30 years since he started Zip2 in like 1996, where initially he was just grinding on software companies. And I think at that point he was just mostly working on software and sales. But then there was this stage between 2001-ish and 2010 where he just didn't want to be CEO, but he was forced into the position of being CEO, and he would go on interviews basically talking about how he really didn't want to be CEO. And then somewhere around 2011, 12, 13, he just stops talking about that. I think most people just haven't studied him and seen that transition. But I think that there was like different evolutions of him. And I'd be curious to know what kind of made that switch.
He is at core an engineer and a product guy, right? And Zip2 and PayPal both were such product-driven companies that sort of an engineering approach could make the company successful. And they were both relatively short duration companies. Like they sold in the first, I think it was 5 or 6 years in the case of Zip2, and like 2 or 3 years in the case of PayPal, but that was a lot of life that lived very quickly. And so that's just a fundamentally different thing than Tesla and SpaceX, where you have to create alignment and vision and product iterations over like a decade plus. And he has this great line where he's like, I realized you couldn't be fully in control of the product unless you were also in control of the company. And you do see that in, Steve Jobs and Wozniak, where like eventually Jobs became CEO, even though or became sort of sole controller of the company, even though he and Woz started it as collaborators, because he's like, I need sole visionary control of this product. And I think Elon is kind of the same way. He says he calls it a moral error early in Tesla, where he was like, I was trying to have my cake and eat it too. I wanted to sort of control the company without running the company. And that was that kind of like 2002 to 2008 era, where Tesla was just off to a really messy start, where he was providing the funding. He was chairman of the board. Martin Eberhard was the CEO, but he was sending him opinions and product ideas and like demands and all this stuff all the time. And it was just chaotic. And eventually when Tesla was like on the verge of death in 2008, Elon was like, I
know there was that inflection point where basically Martin knew the cost of a Roadster, and Elon went to like the engineers that were on the line or, were working on it, and basically asked for a line item breakdown of exactly what the costs were. And I think Martin Eberhard said something on the order of the Roadster cost like $120,000 to make, and the actual number was closer to 150. Yeah. And Elon knew the number, and Elon knew that Martin knew the number. Yeah. And he thought that basically there was like a permanent break in trust.
Yeah, and I think that was after a period of realizing that they didn't actually know the number. They were like, what is this thing that we are selling cost? And like Martin Eberhard didn't know. It's like, all right, they both went and tried to figure it out. And yeah, that was a very ugly period. That was at the end of a whole bunch of kind of disagreements and challenges that they'd been through. But it did push Elon into that position of like, I have to be CEO. I don't want to be. It comes with a lot of chores. It comes with a lot of responsibilities. You're at the nexus of everything. But if I want this company to be successful, I have to fully internalize and take responsibility for it. And that's what he did, even though he was also in the same position at SpaceX. And the fact that both of these companies are improbable, iconic, and that he funded and led them both in parallel is like, I wrote in the introduction of the book, it's like running a 2-minute mile twice at the same time. It is just so improbable, and so it is such a higher degree of difficulty than most people can conceive of. And the fact that it worked is still unbelievable. Balaji, his blurb on the book is like, the better you are, the better you realize how good Elon is. And that is like